Between I have to help.
Yes, of
How do
course.
you say that?
Leufana.
Leufan. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. That's good.
Leufan and Lüneburg, I guess. Right?
Yes. Are you French?
Yes, I'm French.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I have to look at where it is actually. It's south of Hamburg, is that right?
I am born in Hamburg, but at the moment I live in Berlin.
I live in Berlin, of course.
Okay. So you are going to present me shortly?
I'm going to introduce you, yes,
Perfect.
and then you have about 50 minutes. Then we take a few minute break so that if someone has to leave to go teach, for example, he or she can leave, and then we've got maximum half an hour for questions.
Yes,
And
that's nice.
we must end up at 1:30.
Okay, yeah. Great.
Is there anything you want me to mention as part of your introduction?
No, not that I know.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
Sounds good. Let's wait 20 seconds and then we start.
Where are you from in France?
Well, I've been to the US for now 15 years, but I did my degree in Paris at the École Normale Supérieure at the Sorbonne, and I'm from the west. I grew up in the west of France, in Vendée.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's not the most remarkable part of France, but it's perfectly enjoyable. I grew up near the beach, so I can't complain.
Yes, I guess. And only to live in France is a very big fortune, I think.
Yeah, it is a nice country. It has its downsides. I could elaborate.
Nearly every country.
All right. All right, let's get started. Thanks for coming. So let me remind you that there is no talk on Friday. So this Friday, the center is not organizing any lecture. However, the philosophy department has a colloquium at 3:30 on the 10th floor with Karen Bennett from Rutgers on, I suppose, some questions in metaphysics. Today, next Tuesday, Alex Broadbent from University of Johannesburg, who does philosophy of medicine, philosophy of cognitive science, will be giving a lecture on causal reasoning and on causation. Here at the center at noon as usual. And Friday next week, Jeff Schwartz, who is emeritus in anthropology and in HPS, will be talking about the construction of human phylogeny, looking about interbreeding of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens and other species, Denison, and how we can learn about these phylogenetic facts about our species. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Christine Heybl, who is coming from with a lecturer at Leufana University, Lüneburg, which is south of Hamburg, if you didn't know. I didn't know. She got her PhD at University Potsdam. She works on issues around justice and global warming, climate change, what we're going to hear about today. And thanks for coming and thanks for talking to us about this question.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me. This is my first talk in the States, so big day for me. Thank you very much for the invitation. So yes, my talk is divided into two parts. So in the first part, I would like to focus on the human capacities, responsibility and justice from a philosophical perspective. And in the second part, I would like to talk more concretely about climate change, especially about the aspects of climate change that prevent us from acting. So first of all, I would like to illuminate from a philosophical perspective the keywords responsibility and justice. Is it actually possible that humans can take the responsibility for something? Where does this human capacity to responsibility come from? If something like the human capacity to responsibility does not exist or cannot exist, we do not have to ask in which way we have to take responsibility in regard to climate change, of course. But if we do have to take the responsibility, why do we have to search for just solutions? Why does the human being strive towards justice? Where does this phenomenon of justice come from? And finally, considering climate change, How can we find fair solutions in regard to the problems we are going to face through climate justice? Yeah, okay. To ask the question if humans can take responsibility, I looked at the research of Robert Spemann, a German philosopher who specialized in this field. If we ask if someone can be responsible for something, we need to ask in the first place if human beings can be the reason for something, or if we can create something. If we can create something, we have to take responsibility for this certain thing. In regard to human beings, it's interesting because this can be answered in relation to our behavior. So we change something because we behave in a certain way, or we can even be the reason for something new in the world, a new being, a child. But nevertheless, can humans actually be the reason for something, or are we mainly guided by our subconsciousness, our instincts, or the mechanic of the world affairs? Robert Spemann states that human beings have the capacity to be the reason for something, for causalities in the world, and we can provoke developments in the world by accepting free, conscious, and actual single actions. So these are always ruptures in the overall world affairs. So they make a change in the world, these free, conscious, and active single actions. This is what we can observe. So we do not work as a clockwork, which functions automatically, but out of freedom, so neither mechanically, nor automatically, nor instinctively like animals, but we can make a change in the world. Free actions have changing effects on our single life as an individual, which we experience every day, as well as on the overall world affairs. And this is something we are not always aware of. So human beings execute these actions consciously, and we know what we are doing, and we are able to reflect the consequences, and this is why we are responsible for our actions. Morality, therefore, only exists due to the human capacity to act freely in being able to bring good or evil into the world. With a complete predetermination of all world affairs, or if humans could and would always act like angels, we wouldn't need morality. Okay. Now I would like to talk about a phenomenon called technical cumulative collective actions, which was described by another German philosopher, Hans Jonas, who was specialized mainly in the human capacity of responsibility. He stated that today's global problems are challenging as they do not correspond to the scope of our former morality, or not to the extent within we are used to solve problems. Our former morality focused on a small scale, like direct actions, nearly temporal and spatial dimensions, and related to our fellow man, like to live in a little village. And nearly everybody had the necessary knowledge to apply these moral demands. The Industrial Revolution, with its scientific and technical inventions, busted the scope on a temporal scale as well as on a spatial one. By this, our actions affect more and more people and things which are very far away from us. So a mission-intensive lifestyle of people in the global north crucially harms people in the global south and further generations. The important fact now is that our actions affect nature as a whole due to the Industrial Revolution, and for this, we do not have maxims that guide our actions yet, still. We overuse the regeneration capacity of our global ecosystem, and this falls back to us, especially due to the fact that the consequences of our actions remain stable after their activity. So they are piling up in front of us, like, for example, the plastic patch we have in the ocean. So 500 years ago, we had organic waste, which deteriorated, and today the consequences of our actions are piling up in front of each other, and this is new. And therefore, the preconditions for every new actions are changing constantly, and the preconditions before every new actions are fundamentally new. Each action then becomes a precedent. In principle, men are still responsible for their actions, but the estimations of the consequences became impossible. his own acting becomes unpredictable for himself, so he cannot anymore see the consequences of his own action. The unpredictability increases by the fact that the subject that acts is not anymore the individual, but the collective, like big collectives in companies or even in universities. And therefore, the direct causal relation between our action and the output often is not trackable anymore. The offenders become anonymous and they cannot be held accountable anymore. So firstly, the object of action changed instead of our fellow man. It's the whole nature, so all living beings, as well as the subject who acts instead of the single person. It is the collective. And finally, the way we act changed. The way we act changed due to the Industrial Revolution. This is another point. The problem is that the beginnings of our inventions in the technical or scientific field easily can become independent from us. So we start to invent something and the development becomes independent by the pressure it puts on us. So we see a lot of pathways and we always feel that we have to go further and further. And thus, men act beyond their knowledge and the reasonable scope of influence. Knowledge allows us to act as much as ignorance demands a conscious restraint. This is a formula created by Francis Bacon, maybe you know it. Knowledge is power, and therefore we should not act if we are not aware about the possible outcome. At the end, we should be as vigilant as possible about the beginnings of this kind of technical progress and observe every step very carefully. In addition, we have to pay most attention to the worst case scenario. The progress can become unpredictable and the worst case scenario should never ever become reality. The question is, what would be the worst case scenario in regard to climate change? Has anyone an idea? Yes, exactly.
I mean, just worse for us.
Maybe.
For everything else,
Maybe in 200 years it would be good for the Earth, but for us, extinction would be the keyword here. Thanks. Yes, so the circumstances on Earth are not livable anymore, and it's not possible anymore to live a human life in dignity. So humankind would have eliminated itself. But should we even bother? Should that even disturb us because we live today, we live good, we have everything we need? So the provocative question could be, should humanity still exist? This is also something I always ask my students in Germany, and I was a little bit shocked because this year the answers were quite pessimistic. But I still vote for this answer, yes. And therefore I would like to come back to the philosopher I already mentioned, Hans Jonas. Hans Jonas answered these questions with a value theory. He ascribes a value to the human ability to set purposes. This value is superior to all futility. If utility cannot be assigned to a bigger order, it cannot be assigned to anything. But a being sets itself permanently purposes alone to survive, so we have to. The successful achievement of a purpose is considered as a good value, and a good value is supposed to exist. This results from the formal term of something good in philosophy. The problem is what a person who is prone to the Kantian theory would say is that something good always needs a subjective evaluation and is not universally valid as a good purpose. So an achieved purpose could also be an evil one, of course. But we can add a Kantian explanation to this theory. So why we are able to set purposes? Because we can act freely. Human beings can set purposes and follow their intentions. Thus, we can exert conscious single actions, as stated at the beginning of the talk. Through this, human beings are able to realize the transcendental phenomenon of freedom. We cannot find any ultimate justification for freedom or an ultimate proof, but human beings are the only species that are able to realize freedom due to their free will and free actions. So this is how we see that freedom can really be realized. And in the theory of Immanuel Kant, freedom is kind of more important than humans, so freedom is the final purpose of all creation, but men are the last purpose due to their capacity to realize this final sense of all existing, and consequently they are supposed to exist. So we still vote for a yes. Now I would like to have a closer look to the term responsibility, and for that I would like to go back again to the philosopher I already mentioned, Hans Jonas. To Hans Jonas, there are two kinds of human responsibility, which is interesting considering climate change, as both of them played a crucial role in this context. So the first one is the formal understanding of responsibility. There's a causal connection between our actions and the resulting consequences. And it's irrelevant if I wanted the results or not, as long as my acting was the reason for this output, I'll be drawn responsible for it. This is the retrospective responsible attribution. In opposite to that, and this is interesting, the second term of responsibility refers to actions we should carry out for future circumstances. In regard to climate change, we have the responsibility to preserve the global ecosystem and take care for it in a way that our planet is still going to be a place for dignified human life in the future, even with the inevitable consequences which will certainly occur because of our past and current lifestyle. Hans Jonas shows, and this is very beautiful, I think, that there's a living example in our present which represents the future circumstances of our planet. He says it is the newborn which personifies the future to be of our environment and the possibility of coming individuals to develop and thrive on this planet, or due to our influence, be delivered to nowhere. So we, as authors of coming circumstances, have a responsibility to protect and preserve this potential of future human beings. The identity of humans, what really defines us as human beings, the capacity to reason, to freedom, and to responsibility has to be preserved. That we have to take the responsibility on such an enormous scale for everything which is alive only emerged through the scientific progress. Only by this, our actions got the power to leave constant spatial and temporal consequences and reach out around the globe and into the future. As a consequence, the task to take responsibility got moved into the center of morality. Okay. So now I would like to focus on justice, and maybe as a background thought, I started very early to study Kant, Immanuel Kant, and if you study his texts, you always read about morality, 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 and what it means. But I wanted to know, what does he mean would be justice? And he only mentions this term 3 times in all his texts. So twice he mentions injustice and once justice. And at the same time, I had the feeling in his descriptions about morality, justice must be somewhere inside of it. And this is what I wanted to find out in my PhD. And these are kind of my outcomes. All right, so the premise is, fortunately, that humanity should continue to exist. The question is, why do we have to find fair solutions to the upcoming hazards of climate change? We could also just find pragmatic ones. Intuitively, we always have the feeling we need to choose just solutions, but why? And at the same time, the previous climate policy was everything but just until now. We can depict from a philosophical perspective 2 fundamental answers to the question why humans strive to justice. First of all, we live in communities, so our actions always affect other people. And secondly, the human being itself demands justice. Immanuel Kant says to the first point, we all have the right to use the surface on Earth, it's a common good. Thus, we have to implement a jurisdiction, not to live in anarchy and threaten each other constantly. Stefan Gosepart, this is a professor at the Free University in Berlin who works also about justice, clarifies that humans violate each other by fighting for scarce goods which enable us to act. This becomes very obvious in the context of climate warming, like carbon dioxide gives us so much power and so much ways to act. At the same time, it became a scarce resource as fossil fuels are naturally limited, and as we agreed to leave a big part under the ground and not to burn it to prevent further climate warming. Nevertheless, still, could an implementation of a law framework also be constructed with unfair regulations? The answer is provided by the nature of human beings themselves. Human beings are capable to act freely, responsibly, and morally. Through this, they also have to get the chance to act according to these qualities. That means that every human being has the right to a framework which allows him to develop and live his capacities to freedom, morality, and responsibility. Consequently, Kant awards man a right to rights. This right constructs the framework for our capacities to freedom, morality, and responsibility, like an outer shell. Of most importance here is the trans-empirical capacity of humans to realize freedom. Freedom is really like the core of Immanuel Kant's theory, and this is why I always come back to this point. This ability is called trans-empirical because freedom is a transcendental phenomenon, but as humans are able to transform it into an empirical fact, and therefore it can be called also empirical, so it's a trans-empirical phenomenon. As humans are the only living species to do so, we would say that they are endowed with dignity. At the same time, as we all know, humans are gifted with reason, so that the full prosper unfolding of freedom can only exist if the human ability to reason creates its own jurisdiction out of freedom. So freedom and our capacity to reason have to work perfectly together, and our reason finds moral regulations out of freedom. So if we think only reasonably, we are driven automatically to moral laws. And this is the true unfolding of freedom, is a reasonable self-regulation of the free human will. Free and reasonable actions are moral and fair actions, and the only way to treat every person with respect and dignity. So we encounter the universal laws of reason and morality by taking decisions to act through the self-determination of our personal reason. This means, and this is interesting, that the moral laws exist due to our capacity to freedom and for the protection of our free will. These action maxims get written down in the formal legal framework which ensures a peaceful coexistence of all people. And this is again the shell where we are protected and where we can develop our inner morality. Justice is realized if everyone can be free equally. Just shortly to the way how we can establish justice through our actions. As we have the possibility to create just circumstances through our actions, we do also have the duty to do so, as it depends on our acting if other people can live in dignity. Firstly, every person has the obligation to transfer unfair circumstances in the world into fair ones, even if she or he is not directly responsible for them. This is also a big part for climate warming. We are not directly responsible for it, but as we can make a change as human beings in the world, we have the duty to change these circumstances. Okay. A short look about the relation of justice and equality in the Kantian theory. Equality plays a big role in Immanuel Kant's explanation of freedom. The basic thought is that people have to appreciate their freedom equally and reciprocally. To Immanuel Kant, everyone has the same entitlement to respect and dignity, even if they are not able to develop or live the capacity to freedom and reason at the moment, like, for example, young kids or stroke patients or dementia patients. Every single person has a status because of his or her affiliation to the human species, because the human species itself is able to realize freedom. So everyone should get an equal moral treatment, but as we can be different empirically, like we need a different medication, we have different talents, this can lead to a different empirical behavior to ensure an equal moral outcome. So, okay. Last but not least, this leads to substantial consequences. To ensure every individual his framework of freedom entails substantial demands. The body, like the instrument to realize freedom, has to be protected and preserved. So each person has the basic rights to food, clean water, and adequate clothing, shelter. This means everyone has the human rights to self-sustaining resources, because the body is the only way how we can really realize freedom. Furthermore, it is important in the Kantian theory that the actions of freedom, like education, freedom of opinion, freedom of press and speech, freedom of assembly, and so on, are protected thoroughly, and that they get a material space and material possibilities. In principle, Immanuel Kant's philosophy only comprises one single human right, and this is the right to rights. By this, I advocate for a human rights-based approach. So the implementation of justice. I would like to conclude the philosophical part with this thought. The empirical implementation of justice can be achieved in two different ways. So firstly, it can be achieved through just procedures. This is called a procedural justice. And secondly, it can be implemented through a just distribution of goods. This is called a distributive justice. To the first point, a just procedure to figure out fair action maxims is a reciprocal justification of all affected rational individuals. The important thing is that all people who are affected by the law have to be also the authors of it. They have to be included to decide what is right and which is just. But Immanuel Kant also says that a pure reciprocal justification would not be enough, as we could also collectively agree to unreasonable decisions like eating ice cream every morning. So therefore, Immanuel Kant stresses that the general law of freedom always has to be included and be a part of the consideration. So everything we agree on as just regulations always have to drive humankind to freedom, or to the possibilities to realize freedom, and that for every single being. The legal framework, as I already said, is the external shell within every person can explore and develop his inner capacities to freedom and morality. The second kind of justice, the distribution of macrosocial property, has to follow laws of reason as well. But what can be, or what is macrosocial property? What can we really distribute? Everything which is produced by nature is a surplus. This means the amount of natural goods we can use up without being destructive in any kind. We are not allowed to attack the substance of nature, but we have to treat it as a deposit which we have to pass on further generation. Especially the body of the human being as the location to exercise freedom, as well as the actions of freedom themselves, have to get a material space. And the interesting point is that Immanuel Kant does not provide a precise list here. Again, he only gives us the method to distribute it, like to decide together how to do it. And this would also be the reciprocal justification. So we can also just discuss how we distribute the macrosocial property together. And this is interesting because Immanuel Kant always gives us a method, and therefore is eternally valid. We can always use it in every state of our history. Okay. Now I would like to come to the second part, climate justice. So why did I talk so long about philosophy and philosophical thoughts about responsibility and justice? So what do all these conclusions mean in relation to climate warming? What kind of problem we are dealing with here? First of all, we have to state that the consequences of climate warming violate our basic human rights. So the problem of hunger and the lack of water will be intensified by climate change. And it's important, for example, for water to see that this is not only a good we need for our everyday life to drink or to wash, but water, of course, is also crucially necessary for agriculture, for the industry, for hygiene, within the medical sector, to construct infrastructure, and so on. So water is a big, big issue. I just read an article, and they said that in the Western world, each individual uses 400 to 600 liters per day, And in a lot of countries in Africa, they try to achieve 40 liters per day. So water is really an immense factor here in the Western world. Another important right which is threatened by climate change is the right to residency. By sea level rise as well as melting of permafrost soil, small islands and settlements on permafrost soil and low-lying coastal areas will lose their living space. So people living in these areas will lose their living space, but it is also a human right not to be expelled from our living space. Furthermore, and this is also something we unfortunately observe very much at the moment, we are going to be more and more exposed to life-threatening situations by catastrophes of droughts, heating waves, floods, hurricanes, and illnesses. So it is of crucial importance to see that all these hazards are evoked by humans, and therefore there are risks that are provoked by some and which violate the rights of others. So it's neither a scientific problem caused by nature as a natural catastrophe nor bad luck, but it is a moral problem which is caused by humans and that can only be solved by the humankind. Quite often at the moment, if we try to find solutions, we mainly focus on cost analysis, economic side effects, and technical or economic ways. It is important, though, not to lose sight that all these measures can only be instruments to achieve the above all purpose, so enable human life and dignity today as well as in the future. This is also why the argument that climate mitigation is too expensive is first of all inappropriate, because we deal with human lives, and secondly irrational, as we cannot go ahead with money anymore if the conditions on Earth became unlivable. If we consider an economic perspective, human problems of surviving and life quality become technical problems like the management of emissions or something similar. So human needs could get instrumentalized and moral demands relativized, and this should not happen. Discussions about prices and economic incentives can and have to be means like instruments, but we are not allowed to forget what the main issue is, and this is the preservation of human life, and especially what we are as humans, a species which is able to freedom, to reason, and to morality. Okay. So unfortunately, we can observe that humankind didn't do a big effort to really mitigate the climate catastrophe adequately until now. And the astonishing fact is that it's not really expensive. Peter Singer, a professor for bioethics from Australia, calculated in 2007 that we would need only 1% of the global GDP to finance the mitigation measures we need to assure the 2-degree target. In 2017, 10 years later, the price rose already to 2.5%. So of course it becomes more expensive, but however, the expenses are vanishingly small if you consider what kind of problem we are dealing with here. Furthermore, doing nothing will cost us 20 times more than climate mitigation today. Nevertheless, there's still very less action on every level of the global society to prevent us, especially from politics. And the question is why? Why we're doing so less, especially as we do already have so many means, like renewable energy, installation of housing. Why don't we do something? Now I would like to shortly present 4 aspects of climate change which contribute to our petrified attitude. I had 6, but due to the timetable, I will stick to these 4. But you are very welcome to ask me about the other 2 ones later. So the first one is the temporal aspect. And I guess everybody knows about it, but at the same time, we still have difficulties to understand the significance of this temporal aspect. If we harm the climate today, the consequences only take place after a very long time delay. The buffering capacity of certain ecosystems has helped us, kind of, to get into this temporal inertia. So oceans and forests have swallowed the majority of carbon dioxide until now. By doing this, they have compensated for many decades or enormous output and let it vanish. But the buffering capacity of this ecosystem is slowly but surely exhausted. The oceans have reached a point of saturations, and the forest ecosystem compensate less and less as they get reduced more and more by our deforestation, fires, and summer damages. So the possibilities of nature to neutralize our behavior are more and more limited. A second reason for the considerable time delay is that carbon dioxide only shows its harmful effects if a large enough number accumulates within the atmosphere. The retention time of a CO2 molecule in the atmosphere is approximately between 5 to 200 years, while a certain percentage will stay there for much longer or for forever. The time delay on the effects of climate harm action is so long that we do not succeed in relating our behavior with climate impacts and draw the necessary conclusions to alter our behavior. The effects on the climate of taking a cruise trip today with my SUV in California will only unfold in 15 years or later. And this is still unimaginable for us today, and it overwhelms our mental faculties. And even if we succeed in drawing the right conclusion, there will be a motivational problem, because at the time when certain problems appear, it is not us who is responsible for them, but our ancestors. And additionally, we do not primarily protect ourselves by preventing new damages, but above all, future generations. So, in the present, if we see the negative effect of climate change, temporal inertia means that these effects will continue to get exponentially worse unless we seriously commit to long-term transformative actions. Which on the other side means that every year we resist this change, it becomes harder and more expensive. I mean, we already had these big wildfires in California and Australia, and if we imagine that this becomes exponentially worse, this is really threatening, I think. Therefore, the climate problem can also be called a resilient problem, as it is immune to short-term improvements and is in need of a very long-term perspective. Unfortunately, our societal system is not used to the long-lasting time delay, so we urgently have to transform our societal system, as we otherwise will not change our attitude to prefer the short-term profit instead of the morally demanded long-term actions. The temporal aspect is even worse than the spatial dimension for the affected persons, as actors separated by space can still connect and act together, which is what we saw in the Africa Spring, where people got connected through social media and could act together. But people which are separated temporarily cannot connect, and the unborn are not able to give their opinion about recent developments. So the future generations are always at the mercy of our decisions. The strong temporal delay significantly leads to our apathy, as we are used to fast motivation patterns and quick rewarding systems. Okay. Another challenge I would like to mention here is the aspect of interdisciplinary. So the special challenge of climate problematic is that it affects so many of our disciplines. Maybe Leonardo da Vinci would have felt at ease with it, like he was very good for painting and anatomy. He was also a philosopher, so maybe he would have managed to understand a lot of these domains. But the omnipresence of the climate complex challenges the representatives of every domain in our societal system. And the representatives are in, for example, chemistry, physics, agriculture, the education system, the economy, politics, city planning, ecology, traffic, international trade, the medical sector, and many more. I just didn't know where to stop. So on the one hand, the climate problem demands that scientists and equally individuals comprehend all aspects, facets, influences, and solutions of the problem, and also the interconnectedness between these disciplines. On the other hand, you would have to have a genius to understand the whole diversity of the effects from climate change. So it's just very, very complex. Being so complex makes the topic, as well as the arguments of skeptics, often blurry and unscrutable. So for instance, we do not really know what kind of output future cloud formations will have. There's a researcher called Richard Linson, and he found out that maybe the cloud formations who are like higher in the sky will become more, and the ones which are lower become less. And so maybe this is a self-regulation of the climate. And so maybe we do not need to worry, because maybe future cloud formations regulate this problem, but we do not really know. At the same time, the multidimensional nature of climate results in the disastrous consequence that we always shove the problem solution to another domain than ours and blame another specialist for not providing the ultimate solution. So maybe we work in education, but we think, okay, it should be the politics that makes good regulations, or it should be the economy to provide other solutions. So we always shove this to another domain. A classic everyday conversation is always the debate between institutional and individual responsibility. So are state regulations more adequate to mitigate the continuation of climate warming, or is it more effective if every individual eats less meat, drives less the car, supports renewable energies, and so on? Altogether, I would say that it is important to remember that climate warming is a moral problem concerning all of our society, and therefore it demands a holistic approach which do not omit any societal domain. And of course, this is very challenging, this is a very tricky one, but we really need a holistic approach for the whole society. Okay. A deadly property of climate change is that it affects not appear linear or as consistent as, for example, the rising of the sea level. This is another aspect, the aspect of delusion. So a couple of trends, for example, are abrupt and can lead to misunderstandings about the actual long-term consequences of climate warming. Glaciers are a very illustrative case of nonlinear development. At the beginning, while glaciers are melting, the first pleasant effect is more water coming from the mountain rivers and providing a sufficient amount of water in dry areas, of course. Already today, this development is very much welcomed by the local society, for example, in the capital of Bolivia, La Paz, where 80% of the drinking water is fed by glaciers. One day, and I actually read an article which was published in January, and actually already in January it looked like that, so the glaciers were already vanished. So one day, which happened in January, they will vanish completely and they will not regrow, as the precipitation patterns are very likely to change. So very likely maybe it will regrow a little bit in wintertime in Bolivia, but not as much as it's needed continually. And this will cause severe droughts, and which is still unimaginable for the population until now, because until now they had a really good flow of water and they had enough sufficient water. The further nonlinear problem is the effect of climate change on agriculture. In general, plant growth is expected to increase owing to rising levels of carbon dioxide. In combination with warmer temperatures, the result could be better harvests in cooler regions, right? So from this perspective, it could be possible that Russia would rather profit than suffer from global warming. So they kind of cherish global warming because they have warmer temperatures and more carbon dioxide, so they have bigger harvests. But of course, plants do not only need CO2 to grow. For most terrestrial ecosystems, a lack of water and nutrition prevents an increase of growth. If nitrogen is the limiting factor, plants will contain a smaller amount of proteins, whereby the quality and the nutritional value of crops will go down. So therefore, we have a bigger amount of food, a bigger harvest, but we would also need to eat more of this harvest. So we just have a new balance. These nonlinear effects can sometimes mask the long-term consequences for the future and prevent action to establish for the correct mitigation and adaptation measures today. So they kind of mask what really happens today. So the last point will be the aspect of insecurity, which I find very, very important today as well. So further obstacle preventing us from acting against climate change is that the problem's complexity is afflicted with insecurities from all sides. So every domain fights with insecurities. Basically, reforestation, for example, is an overall good measure, but we have to avoid at all means to transform precious ecosystem as moors into woods. In addition, we have to keep in mind the competitive relationship of reforestation and agriculture. So also reforestation is not only a good mean, but also inflicted by insecurities, and we have to make more research to make that happen. And altogether, climate as a whole is a chaotic system, and even climate scientists tend only to understand the little part they are working on. Altogether, it is a field of empirical research, which means that we only have access to a little part of existing data. If we examine tree trunks, for example, we can only examine the ones which exist today, and of course only not all of them, hopefully, so we do not want to cut all the trees today. And we do not have access to the ones in the past and not the ones in the future, so we only always have an access to a certain part of empirical data. And for this reason, climate scientists can only provide us with probability statements like the IPCC. From this perspective, skeptics say that it's only reasonable to wait. Still, we really have the right conclusions, and therefore we should better invest all our financial resources into immediate problems like social problems like unemployment. So if we are not totally secure, we shouldn't invest so much money. Okay. So at the end, like I'm going to run out of time, I just want to mention 2 of my positive outlooks or solution propositions. Altogether, I have 6, so you can also ask me about them in the discussion. So the first one is very easy, so I think we should implement all the easy solutions first. So we have a lot of possible solutions which we already explored on a maximal scope for renewable energy. Germany is quite famous for its development of renewable energies. Unfortunately, we are stuck at the moment, but for renewable energies like solar power or wind power, we really explored it in a wide scale. We have very advanced measurements to do so. So I think we should just implement that, because these are measures who save energy in other parts, like for nuclear and coal power plants, and they are very efficient. And we just have the means to use natural resources at wind power and solar, so we should also use them. With a very high probability, these measures need a first significant seed funding and political support, but at the end, they would have a huge net use today and in the future. A second proposition is that I think we should create an association for the protection of future generation. So we have to be aware of the fact that the current generation will always discount the needs of future generation in favor to their own advantage. This is normal, this is something we always do. But considering this, it would be best to create an institution, especially as a representative of upcoming people. Discrimination because of a difference in time or space is not permissible, but something which is often executed and related to our short-term motivational system. So future generations cannot express themselves, but they would get a chance to do so, to be represented by a special organization on an international level. And I think we also have international institutions which could be used for this purpose. So we do not have to create something new because we are running out of time. But I think this would be something which would really, really help us to focus on future needs. So these are only 2 ideas of my work, and I would really be happy to discuss them in the further discussion. And of course, I'm also open to new ideas and further remarks. And thank you very much for your attention.
We'll take a 2-minute break and then we'll have time for questions.
Yeah. It's just my But yeah, it's like some pledges that kind of. The ones involving bigger.
Hi.
Thanks for the offer.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Was
Your
it?
talk could have been much shorter if you just stopped at human extinction is a good idea.
Maybe in next year.
I'm glad you didn't. Okay.
I thought that the second part was much more interesting, so I didn't want to stop there.
Okay, that's good. So you can sit there and just say yes. But hypothetically speaking, if it's
Yeah, true. I will consider that for the next
I'm
time.
glad you kept going.
Okay. Was it understandable?
Oh, totally.
Okay, good. That's good.
No problem.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's fine. Thanks.
Yeah, well, yeah. So far, so good. I was just curious about the thing.
Sorry, may I ask something?
Yeah.
Is Anka here as well?
No.
Ah, okay.
She actually wasn't able to come.
Ah, all right.
She's a, she's a provost.
Yes, I read that.
And, she was supposed to come.
Yes.
Because she's a, and I think she has to send you her apologies. So I
Yes.
please accept her apologies. She's very busy and as a provost, she always have last minute.
Oh, yeah.
It's often, often to send her, well, often, occasionally to send her, but more often she says she's going to come and doesn't come.
Ah, okay.
Last minute of last minute meetings and requirements. It's just such a challenging job to be a provost.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We admire her. She nevertheless is still doing some scholarship.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she wasn't able to come.
she wrote me she would come, and I was just curious to get
She
to know
actually,
her.
was supposed to come,
Yes.
and we worked with her in making sure this time in principle we worked with her, but the last minute, a couple of weeks ago, she sent us an email, actually,
Okay.
telling us she would benefit.
Okay. Ah, nevertheless, nice group here.
Right, let's reconvene for question. Please raise your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask about the assumption you take that humankind should continue to exist. Should humans go extinct in say 300 years
Uh-huh.
when everyone of us and everyone will ever encounter naturally died by then? What's so bad about it? I mean, intuitively it sounds really bad, but what's the content around calling it a bad thing? That should humans extinct in 300 years?
So yes, the point I defend from the perspective of Immanuel Kant is that the human species is the only species which is able to act morally. And this is something we didn't find until now in any other species, in any other living species. And this is only something we can do because we are able to act reasonably out of freedom. So we have the capacity to realize morality, and this is something so special, something we do not want to lose with the human species. And this would be like the answer to it.
Right. But wouldn't that kind of valuation be only from our subjective point of view? It's by our
Yes.
judgment that
Yes.
Being such a moral being is such a valuable thing, and we do not want to lose it. But yeah.
Yes, this is true. I also heard a talk about one of my favorite professors in Germany, and the question was, she was asked if we cannot be sure that other species do not have this possibility also to act morally or freely, because we cannot talk to them and we cannot really understand how they take decisions. But her answer was, and I found it very understandable, that of course we can't, because we cannot communicate with other species, but we see it in our actions, how we behave, and we always recognize the moral demands inside of ourselves every day and every time we take decisions. So we know that humans are able to do so. And the probability that there's another species maybe outside in another galaxy which can behave in the same way is very probable, but until now we only know that humans are able to do so. And this is why we are, until now, the most precious species only for this part. And at the same time, this also gives us the power of destruction. So only because we can make changes in the world, we can also destruct nature. And this is why we have this big responsibility to preserve it. So of course it's like two-sided, this way to act morally. But we think still this is very precious as a singular feature of a species.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So okay, let me ask like this. It sounds like it's untrue that the fact that we, for the reason that human is the only moral being, only kind of moral being we know of now, we value the existence of future human being, of existence of the species. But that sounds like prudential reason, not a moral reason, right? It sounds like because we value this, right? The ultimate justification of why human beings should continue to exist comes from the fact that we take it to be valuable. But we take it to be valuable doesn't sound to give a moral reason. It gives a prudential reason. Like it's good for me. It's good if I can have something nice for dinner tonight. There are certain reasons for me to do something so that becomes possible. But that's a prudential reason, right? I have the prudential reason to promote a good dinner for myself. Right. The reason you gave for why human beings should continue to exist sounds more like a prudential reason, not like a moral reason. Not that we have any moral obligation to make sure humans continue to exist, but that we value it and for our own good, we try to promote it. Is that right?
I wouldn't agree, to be honest, because to state that we are able to realize morality is a moral statement. I think so. So to say that we are able to do so, or that we have this capacity, is something unique, and this can be counted as something like a special feature. And without any good or bad evaluation, we would just say that this is special for the humankind. So we do not need to call it a positive or a negative feature, but it's just something which is special for humans. And this makes why we are so extraordinary without valuing good or bad. And this is what, from a Kantian philosophy or from a Kantian standpoint, we would say humans should still exist, because this is something which stands out in all, from all living beings. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks very much. I'm trying to understand the strength of the claims that you're making, and I'm hoping you can help me. So if I understand the dialectic right, you're establishing a framework of rights on the basis of a certain kind of being that can exercise freedom and reason. And that there's a certain framework of rights that springs out of that, including the framework that you established whereby we've got a right to certain kinds of things that make us thrive, food, shelter, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the third part of your talk, you outlined, I guess the third and the fourth, potential risks of climate change and potential actions. Now, I'm interested in whether we have a moral obligation to pursue certain courses of action or not, because one would assume, if this is a Kantian framework, that we have some sort of obligation to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But that would, I think, require that you showed that this was an inevitable outcome. As you said, we need to be sure of the outcome on certain kinds of Kantian frameworks. But that seemed to me dubitable, right? It seems like there's scope for a rational Kantian climate denier.
Mm-hmm.
Someone, or maybe if not a climate denier, then someone who admits climate change but thinks that there will be a technological solution. And if that's the case, it doesn't seem to me like there's a straightforward obligation to pursue any of the solutions that you outline.
Mm-hmm.
Am I understanding the dialectic right? And if that's so, what would you say about the possibility of someone who, like a rational Kantian optimist,
Mm-hmm.
right, who thinks like, look, if we plow money into the economy,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get a technological fix, we're
Mhm.
going to extract the CO2 from the atmosphere,
Mhm.
but that won't happen if we reduce investment in industry.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of something like that?
So you mean there could be someone who's not completely for climate mitigation, but more for investigations in the economy?
I'm saying it seems like we can construct a Kantian agent who accepts some of the evidence, maybe all of the evidence that you put forward, and suggests that I will take none of the actions that you suggested. I can take a completely different course of action.
Okay, yes.
And if that's the case, then what should we do with your recommendations? Are they...
Okay, good. Yeah, of course, that's actually completely possible. So, of course, there are different pathways for the climate mitigation. And yes, there could be people which are on my side concerning the philosophical statements, like we have to preserve humankind because we are a precious species and so on. But we can take completely different pathway for mitigation. This is sure. And there you have to go deeper into mitigation measures and how they work and if they work. But of course, there could also be someone who supports climate engineering, and there I would go more into details if climate engineering is the right measure, if it's long-term, how it affects certain powers in the world, like political powers. But then this is really the field to discuss practically climate mitigation measures. And of course, they can also disagree with my proposals. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering whether, is this just your construction of a Kantian argument for climate change, or do you actually think that the Kantian has the best argument to say that we have some obligation to address climate change?
Yes, I think so.
Do you think it's a better argument than the consequentialist argument?
Yes, I do.
And can you just tell me why you think a consequentialist what makes one better than the other in your view?
I would say the Kantian view, he gives us this universally valid method to always go through this pathway of justifying each other. Like all afflicted person or all affected person always have to find a way to find the right solution together. And this is like a universally valid method which we can use at every stage of our history, like every day. And just also where I came to this topic was we were treating the Third Reich in philosophy as well. And one of the German philosophers, Hannah Arendt, she said that our basic human rights are not valid anymore after the Third Reich of the Nazis, because we destructed our human dignity by this. And then my task in my master thesis was to show that human rights are always valid, also after what we did in the Third Reich. And Kant says that even if we can do very, very evil things in the world, or when we kind of destruct the human dignity, our basic human rights are always valid, because we can always rediscuss how fair solutions should be set in a new setting. And I think this makes us valid like every day and for the rest of our humanity, or for the rest of the history. And this is why I think this is very, the best way to justify our existence.
Yeah, so I just have like really quick to piggyback off of Andrew's point. Like, there is actually someone who argues exactly what Andrew was saying, and seems on the surface to be very much like a committed Kantian. His name is Jules Simon. He's an economist of the School of Economics that call themselves cornucopians. So the people who argue that the right way to respond to the problem posed by climate change is actually to accelerate industrial production. That at some point we will engineer or we'll innovate our way out of the problem, because that's what we've been doing for as long as human records. So anyway, I think he's wrong, but it's an interesting and it's very like impactful argument. Lots of people think that this is could be a good way forward. So it's something that gets a lot of traction in debates. So, I wanted to press actually on Adina's point. So part of my background is environmental philosophy. And so one of the discussions that comes to mind when you're giving a Kantian analysis of why we should adopt this Kantian framework for thinking about our moral responsibilities for the problem of climate change, one of the things that comes to mind for me is other ways of slicing the problem that climate change poses, which is to say that philosophically speaking, it's a problem in the sense that human beings have long, especially in the West, have long taken this very anthropocentric approach to thinking about our responsibilities and our obligations to non-human animals and other environments, and even to a certain extent, other human beings. So I'm wondering why, it's like what you've given is a thoroughly anthropocentric analysis here. And so one could say, as people have argued, that this analysis could still commit us as a moral action to the oppression of other non-human animals and to the destruction and obliteration of other environments for the sake of meeting human ends. The sort of cornucopian response is, well, we just turned the entire world into resources for human beings. Because we have these moral obligations to meet human needs and ends into future generations. So I'm wondering why you think that an anthropocentric way of anthropocentric analysis of our moral responsibilities is an appropriate one.
Good question. That kind of goes back to the first questions. The Kantian philosophy just thinks that we are a very special species by our capacities to act reasonably, act freely, and therefore act morally. And that ends up in an anthropocentric perspective, which is true completely. This is also why Immanuel Kant is criticized quite often also in Germany by environmentalists, because they say, no, we have to have another approach and we are responsible for the whole nature. And so there's one of the philosophers I mentioned, Hans Jonas, he reformulated the categorical imperative from Immanuel Kant, and he said that at the moment our biggest challenge is, or our biggest obligation is to act in a way to preserve the nature or the whole earth in a way that dignified human life is still possible in the future. And therefore, he also means that we have to preserve nature as a whole, because this is the platform for human dignity, which is also an anthropocentric perspective, which is true. So mainly if you look more into Kantian philosophers nowadays, which are like smaller ones in Germany, they say that Kant would also say that we would need to preserve nature as a whole, because this is like the platform for us to evolve and to develop our free thinking, our morality. But that Kant also would have said that nature as itself has its own purpose, because we cannot really see freedom in nature as itself, but human nature evolved out of this whole complex of nature, of course. And so, like this is the source of human beings, of humankind, and all of our capacities, we also have to preserve nature as a whole. But yeah, it stays on an anthropocentric level, which is completely true and which can be disputed. I think other perspectives like holistic approaches and also more biocentric approaches are interesting today, to see that biodiversity is just something which can be seen wholly at itself. And this is also why we cannot leave out any species which dies today. So this is why we really have to look at the overall ecosystem, which is, another perspective which should be taken into account for climate change.
I also have.
What?
Yeah, you want to follow up?
Yeah, can I, real quick?
Yeah, because we got time.
A
So go ahead.
suggestion that I think, there's problems with the biocentric approaches as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kantian would want to push back against the biocentric approaches for good and reasonable reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But just a suggestion, I think maybe the operative question here is really something like, can you accommodate something like the ecological value of human morality, or the ecological value of human beings in a Kantian framework? Right? That's the operative question, not that we're unique and not that from our own position as valued in ourselves, we see the value of human existence. Or rather, can we justify that from an ecological perspective?
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
I also have a question about the uniqueness. And the question takes off an example from a popular movie, Planet of the Apes. Has anyone not seen Planet of the Apes?
I have not seen that.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Confession.
Yeah, the original. Yeah, so the original. So I'm gonna give. Do you mind if I say a spoiler? Okay. So in the original movie, right, it's about nuclear war and not about climate change, right? But the idea is that humans destroy themselves, and it makes possible for the evolution of another being, another type of species, with the same type of freedom that maybe under certain accounts exercises it even better than humans. Right? So the question about whether or not we have an obligation to perpetuate the existence of human freedom such as it is, right, on Kantian grounds, doesn't necessarily mean that if humans were to go extinct, that some other more perfect in freedom, right, species could evolve. So it seems to me that if you do want to double down and accept, right, that this is ultimately the grounds for the moral requirement for action in climate situations, there has to be some sort of argument that something like that's implausible or very unlikely to happen. It's difficult for me to see how such arguments could go, right? And I think that would be another reason for moving away from an anthropocentric view, but that seems to be really baked into the Kantian framework, so I don't know what to do about that. So, so the question is, Planet of the Apes, what do we...
Might we have an obligation at some point to make ourselves extinct?
So if we knew, right, that a more species that has more perfect freedom in this sense, if we had to reason to believe that, then we would have an obligation, right, in the sense that our existence is precluding the existence of that more perfect species.
Right.
Now,
Or like a perfect AI.
maybe.
But we, yes.
Okay, let's not confuse 2001.
I mean, maybe it would be nice to meet a species which kind of help us out in this catastrophe. So if we would meet a species and they would just, why not? And I was at a book reading, and one person presented the book, and he speaks about artificial intelligence and the climate catastrophe. And he says human beings, so our evolution is that we go further and further for the artificial intelligence, but we kind of screw up for climate change. But at the end, the artificial intelligence will help us out and will lead us out of climate warming. So maybe the thing is just only we did not meet any kind of species that is more intelligent than us, and maybe, yeah, so we do not really have a choice today, or we do not really have anyone to address another species except us. And I also think what makes this human species crucially interesting is that at the one hand we have all these dystopies and we like to draw them and to paint them, so what happens if we are getting distinct and so on, but at the same time we are also able to draw utopies, so we also know the way out, and we also know the way out within the next 9 years. We have renewable energies, we have transition towns, we have sharing models, we have a lot of mitigation measures, and we can draw this utopia, and we could even realize this. And only because the humanity is able to do so is also a unique sense that we should, yeah, tackle this problem and stay alive, I think so, or protect humankind.
It's also the best way to protect chimpanzees.
Until now, yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your talk. And I guess, I don't know if this is a question or a comment or observation or something like that, but let me try to get to a question at the end. I'm glad your talk was not about science in a certain sense, although that's going to end up to be my question. Because I think that the question, I think the global warming, climate change issues in science aren't all that front and center, aren't all that interesting. I think they're largely significant. Now, high altitude clouds and all that fun stuff, yes, definitely needs further research. But I always thought the major issue in climate science was action, was moral, was not really a scientific question per se. And I think that's clearly what you're getting at. But the type of science that's done on these 10th and 11th floors isn't science per se, but it's history and philosophy of science, or Center for the Philosophy of Science. And philosophy in this big jumble has among other things, ethics, right? Okay. So science to a certain extent, or a derivative thereof, namely technology, is sort of what got us into this problem. Before we had a scientific understanding of the world, we couldn't trash the planet to the degree that we're doing today because of science or its derivative. Does then science in and of itself have a larger responsibility to try to address this in a way that ordinary average non-scientists do not, even though I agree with your argument that it's a collective responsibility. I'm not saying that no one's immune from the responsibility, but is there a certain sense in which science, all other things being equal, ought to sort of try to address these problems because it, so to speak, helped to create them?
Yes, I think so. I mean, what I voted for is a holistic approach. So I think what we should envision today is really that we have to take every domain, and there the obligation of science today is to make this clearer, I think. So what I also say with a transdisciplinary aspect is that we always show the problem to another domain, and maybe today we should really envision that it's for every domain, and this is what should make clearer today. And we have mitigation measures, or we have approaches in the educational system. For example, I work at a university in Germany, and for the first semester, all freshmen learn about sustainability the whole semester. So there's something which could be implemented in much more university as an educational approach. We have renewable energies. We have very good measurements for agriculture. So I think we should point out today, also from a scientific point of view, which is also basically philosophical, that we need a holistic approach, and that everybody should be aware that it affects every domain of its life. And concerning the technical developments, I think we have to be very, very careful, because in Germany we are very advanced for the technologies in renewable energies, but they were overused. So we had this rebound effect that even if we had more renewable energy, we just used more energy in general. So also with technical progress, we won't achieve less energy consumption, so we have to have this also in another domain. So we really have to tackle it all over, and this is what we should make clearer today, especially in philosophy. I would say so.
Yeah.
One thing is education, which I think we should start from kindergarten and elementary school. Is too late when we start at university. I agree. But we are also talking about, we were talking about moral, ethical issues. How we can change that? Because where we are getting moral things is, family, school, and society, right? Through our life. But we don't have that changed yet. And so that is question. Second is just information. Our Chatham University at Pittsburgh, they are like first in ecology environment. I think in the United States or probably the world, they have a whole campus dedicated to protection of environment. So we visited. It was at Carnegie Mellon University was Energy Week, so we visited that campus, and everything is solar, everything is usable, all climate, water, heating, cooling. They after the sewage, they clean it and then they put in rivers, and they increase actually river quality by that because they are totally like reusable. And there were a couple Native Americans with us. And they said, we are very confused why people, humans, are talking about to be extinguished if they go, wrong way. We don't think about that. We think about planet. To say planet, we never think about us as humans. Because, they identify them with, let's say, bear or eagle. So you are bear family, and everybody is bear, and bear is your family, and your ancestors are bear or eagle. So I like that somebody mentioned, why we are anthropocentric. Those Native Americans are not at all, and they are totally confused why we are thinking about that way. They are thinking about everything else. It's about planet. And if you can answer a question regarding morality, how we can change, what is the best way, ethical norms. How can't we do that?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, so it's an interesting point because Kant also says that, like humans, we are divided beings. So on the one hand, of course, we are animals and we have our needs and our instincts, and on the other hand, we are reasonable beings and we can think. So everyone always have to strive to act morally this whole life and has to learn eternally in this life, also as humankind. How to implement that? I myself would like to have the topics in school, also in elementary school, and I would vote to have environmental protection and philosophy as school subjects. That would be very, very good. And then just teach that during school the whole life. And I also would personally, I would like to see connections between green projects and schools, like to connect organic farms with schools and to get people more into more practical experiences, because then they can also visualize to do it later in their own life. But at the moment, a lot of this education stays on the theoretical level, and that doesn't help people to do something. And I think today we know already so much, and we learn about environmental protection, and we know so many means and measurements and instruments, but we do not really do something. And so I think it would be nice to connect schools, elementary schools, but also other schools with real organic farms or real projects, and to get people like in a hands-on mentality as well. So start early and connect learning with hands-on projects. This is what I would like to see.
All right, I think it's time to stop. Thank you, Nagi, for the center.
Oh,
and
nice.
Thank you for your talk.
Literally, before the talk, it's
Wow, I really like
all the inconsistencies and green people, sort of whatever. And I mean, there's an asymmetry. We all know that the global north is far more responsible for environmental damage than the global south. The global south is paying the higher price. It's going to be paying the higher price. Similarly, even within the global north, there are people who profited an awful lot more from dirty money, dirty technology, or whatever, who want to now collectivize the whole sort of mediation or answer problem. Like, we all have to address it, but I'm not going to give up that which I got or inherited because of ugly stuff, environmentally damaging stuff. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Yes.
So applying that whole thing to science, the science have to sit there and say, as a field, sit there and say, we have to create this problem. We have a greater responsibility. We have a responsibility as part of our content, everything like that, and rationality. But do we as scientists have a particular responsibility in a way that ordinary average people don't? Because clearly they were acting out of ignorance and invincible ignorance. They could not possibly have foreseen, even though we in science could have. But didn't go.
Here we go.
So it's one of these situations where like,
Anyway, that was sort of
a
question about science.
Okay. Okay, now I got it even better. Yes, I think that was also one point in my PhD that, I mean, we have special responsibility as people who know a lot about it, right? And what I think is, yes, we have to educate other people, and everyone has to address all the things he or she knows. So my scope of acting is as wide as I can because I know a lot, so to keep the knowledge further. And everything I know what I can improve in my own life, I have to improve. So my power is as far as my knowledge.
And then power also provides responsibility. If you have the capacity to consider, you have to at least consider the possibility of a responsibility for that.
Yes.
I mean, that's sort of standard.
Yes, okay, but I think also for people who are not as educated as us, maybe we should also make them clear for them that they also have possibilities to act. And as far as they know about it, they should also act according to it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. But the consequences of their actions are not as damaging as they otherwise would have been had it not been for high tech. One philosopher had the great phrase that he used, I sort of forget. Consequential.
Knowledge is power? No,
the technological, consequential, communal, collective.
Collective, technical behavior, or
Some people, some groups, not individuals, but in one sense individuals, but even groups within society contributed more to that than others.
And also especially in collectives. And then we cannot really point out the offender anymore, which is a big problem. But I think if we know how much the collective damages, we could try to make special changes within the collective where we are acting.
Yeah, right. And it's a collective, but I mean, I'm thinking like an artist who just has a great understanding of the human condition and can write great stories about the human condition and all of our experiences. Right? I don't know that he or she has any greater responsibility to write questions about climate change. One could imagine that he could write a story about an elderly gentleman in Austria who saw the glaciers disappear over the course of his lifetime. Sees a young kid coming up and realizes that his granddaughter will never see the glaciers the way that he did. Okay, in an artistic sense. Okay, but he could also write a story about a love relationship, and he might. I don't know if he has any greater responsibility to write a climate change work of art than a love or discrimination or economic oppression type of story in his artistic capacity than a scientist would have in hers, since that field, in a way that art or literature did not contribute to the same degree, even though it did. We all do, but that little subfield didn't really contribute. But science, technology did.
I think he would. because he has the talent to do so, and maybe to draw other people into this spectrum of knowledge. But on the other hand, of course, we do not have to lose every other parts of our culture. So also, if someone is very talented to write music, he should absolutely stick to that, because we still need poems, or we still need to love stories and novels and so on.
But within the field of writing music, she doesn't have to write great works of music about climate change. Like,
No, sure.
in a way that arguably scientists ought to be pursuing lines of inquiry that do address climate change. More so than just because he or she wants to, or as a collective field ought to pursue that. I'm thinking of zero sum. I mean, you're either going to do this or you're going to do that. And that being said, I'm not knocking this because it's a brilliant field, but I mean, whatever. Particle research or very advanced modern medical techniques like hip replacements and stuff like that. It's good that we have them. I know people who have them. I may need one someday. But if I don't, this person didn't get a hip replacement, he or she is going to be doing okay, not going to die. I mean, so, but if we have limited resources, science, having created this major problem, or been significantly creative, science ought to do more. Does science have a greater obligation to address the question? That's my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the last point was also interesting with education. But I think, like what we have to do in science at the moment, to teach people that it is an overall challenge. So we really have to address it in every part of our life, and I think people should get aware of it, and this is something we should spread.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
And it's not only something we can get rid of with green technology, because we have these rebound effects, or we cannot only use renewable energy because we do not have enough. There's also a big question in Germany, because everybody wants to have an electric car, but we would need to have the double of the energy we produce all over if we would have our whole flood of cars with renewable energy. So we won't make it, and we only have 40% for our normal consumption. So we have also to teach people to just use less energy, to get rid of the second car, and this is an overall problem, and we cannot only fix this with renewable energy or advanced technology in agriculture. We also have to go back to our roots and do organic agriculture and enhance the carbon sequestration in agriculture. We have to buy less things and so on. So
agriculture might be the best example, because I know that is actually the most damaging to the environment overall.
Yeah, 20%. Yeah.
And so, I mean, the fields are interrelated, because agriculture also implies energy usage and other such things. But I know that agriculture is considered, the field of agriculture is actually, if you isolate out or apportion different things thereof, agriculture is very damaging.
Yes. And
this
this is the dramatic thing, because we could easily make it to a carbon sink.
Exactly.
More or less easily,
but or more easily.
Yeah, so this is also why I would like to specialize in this field more and more, because if we transform it, it could be a massive sink for carbon dioxide. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know in the environmental movement in the 1960s or 70s, the sort of contemporary, I know in the United States, and I forget who said it. There was the 8 rules of environmental. At the time, you've certainly heard the term ecology. This was called the ecology movement. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was one of the rules was we are all downstream. Now, you know what it means to be downstream? They're like, if you dump something into a stream and the stream's flowing that way, those people will not have any, but these people will. And it could be something completely benign or even beneficial, but it could be damaging. So like downstream means literally down the stream in a river, but metaphorically means future, down the line type of thing. And so one of their mottos was, we are all downstream, meaning that everything, like we can sit there and dump something into the river and sit there and say, oh, let the downstream people worry about that. But the ecology movement said we are all downstream. So that's part of what ethos that they were trying to impart in everyone. We all are going to be suffering the consequences of other actions that presume that formerly we would have just treated as unimportant down the line or someone else's problem. That seemed that was what they were getting at with that.
Wow.
Both not only scientifically but also sort of metaphorically.
Even though I don't think so, that we are all downstream.
Well,
I mean, it could be in 10 years, especially like food is much more expensive because of droughts, of floods, of and so on.
I mean, if we all die, if I die tonight, you die tonight, she dies tonight. In one sense, it doesn't matter because we're dead. But in another sense, I mean, my argument was always that that's still me, even after I die. It's something that I did. It's not agency in the same way, but it's something that I did and created. So that's part of me down the line. So I don't know. But I don't know. But I forget who said that. It might have been Paul Ehrlich. Have you heard of him?
No.
He was sort of one of those first wave, starting really the modern environmental movement in the United States. And we started in the 1950s. I don't know how closely you followed it. You've certainly heard of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And before that, there was an Aldo Leopold. He was a famous author who wrote about these things. And then people started to think in these terms. But by the late 1960s, these fields had sort of become well developed. And one of the 8 commandments of environmental, the ecology movement was we are all downstream. I don't know, you might want to look that up for the future. I mean, it's not central to your argument, but it's the type of thing that's on the side when coming in.
Interesting, because I would still say that we are very upstream and we give it all away. But at the same point, what you said about the people who do not know so much about it, we have all this knowledge, and I think the knowledge puts us on so much responsibility. So the more I know, the more I have to act correctly and give it further, and it also puts me down because it's very depressing. So that kind of downstreams me, the knowledge and the responsibility with it. So this is something I would see with that.
I mean, in the late 1970s, you're certainly familiar with the American president, Jimmy Carter, who had a very reasonably pretty good energy policy for the U.S. in the 1970s. Several energy crises, right, with oil and other things. So one of which was that for household appliances sold in the United States, it had to have an estimated energy cost per year sticker on the item.
Oh, good.
So even if the cost, and I'm going back to like 1980, even if you were buying a household appliance for like $200 and there was one right next to it for $160, like the $200 one would have an annual electrical fee of like $8, and $160 would have an annual electric fee of like $18. If you did the math in your head, you would very quickly realize that, hey, I'm going to be keeping this for 10, 15, 20 years. You could do the math. So even individual actors who couldn't possibly access all that knowledge had ballpark figures that they could deal with just right there in front of their face. And what happened is the sale of energy efficient appliances skyrocketed, even though they were more expensive on day one. People did mathematical, very simple arithmetic calculations in their head very quickly and said, oh, this one is cheaper for me, even though it's $40 more expensive. So individual actors had the knowledge to make a responsible decision. I would say correct decision, but whatever decision they made, they could make it in a more informed fashion. If they just look and say, wait, 200, 160, I'm going with 160. Because even though 160 was a more expensive product down the line.
Yeah, good. I mean, this is something where the economy or politics have to give the incentives or to lead the individual in the right direction. But if we are that far that the individual could make choices considering the prices and the ecological output, this is fantastic because that will become more and more important in the future for every field. So if we include all the external costs, for example, for food, then the organic food would be more cheaper, and it would be such a good, it would be so good to see that in the future because, it's just too obvious that we have to do that.
I don't know if you followed it closely, but this part of the United States, all over the United States, but this part is very particularly influenced by a boom in a type of oil drilling called fracking. You familiar with that? And it's a new way, and it's actually sort of moderate cover. And but it has like consequences that like are not. I mean, it even like increases the rate of earthquakes.
Yes.
Like places near fracking that are nowhere near earthquake zones, like California, are experiencing these earthquakes. And geologists are saying, yeah, that's because of this fracking process that's altering the landscape. Wow. And of course, it's also showing and almost certain down the line, decades down the line, going to have very serious consequences on groundwater. It's just going to destroy the groundwater and make it unusable. And so, but those are down the line. But it's not when people buy this either natural gas or petroleum products, gasoline, that's not factored into the price of that. It doesn't sit there and say, now someone else is going to be paying, this gasoline is being sold for, we call it gallons here, but someone else, for you to buy this gasoline, has to pay this price, that someone else is paying. You're not paying, I'm not paying when I go fill up my car, but someone else is paying this so I can buy cheap gasoline.
Yes, true.
But ordinary average people are, to a significant degree, ignorant of it. Sometimes, understandably, other times, it's either their own moral, I don't want to know, or they're just deliberately kept in the dark so that these people don't have, don't have any moral qualms about it.
Yeah, I think in Germany the point is that sometimes people get information and then they see that something catastrophic will happen, and then they get frightened or they got ashamed because they know that they contribute a lot, and then they just turn their back and they say, oh, they don't want to know more. This is something we also figured out at the university where I work, and they figured out this like the climate psychology, that people get to know little points and then they get frightened and then they just kind of run away to get to know more, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
So, but maybe when she said that with the educational system, if we could really make that work to have it as a topic in school, and also to teach children about good approaches and motivating approaches, I think that could do an enormous amount of good outputs.
I think
It's interesting talk and to follow up. I talked to this lady, I was thinking she's professor here. How long you will stay?
I leave tomorrow.
Okay, so you were just checking. I was thinking to organize like workshop about exactly what you said. Through history, which philosopher was touching, and like 4 elements like fire, water, so there's volcanoes, they have, flooding, and so they have the 4 elements, in the body, and so, and the existence, human existence of it, environment, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, all this stuff. And then coming to Renaissance, how body, when they start anatomy and so things, so it's fluid, this is life, you cannot take blood from, And then Kant and moral issues now, artificial intelligence, can they help us or no? Exactly what we were asking. But they have this workshop. So for that, we usually do internationally, and we need to have people who are in your area.
Oh, interesting.
So you need probably to look for who works in your area, I mean, just from citations, and probably suggest, but you are leaving. But they will, before you leave, just tell them at the airport that we may have workshop. And then visit that, what I'm telling you, another university, not far from here, Chatham, because they have an environmental university. And just I will just give you Chatham, the name of university, so that you know Chatham University, CH. Is on And whoever will, somebody will give you ride to airport. Today? Yeah, or you do by yourself? But you are meeting people here. So Chatham University, do they have Chatham? CH. Okay, Chatham University. Just for workshop or something. and see how many people you can bring from Germany and with local. So we'll be starting, Socrates and so those 4 elements, and all philosophers who touch that. So will be human identity and environment, and then moral issues. Exactly what you are saying, morality and all these things. And role of science and our responsibility to people. What do you think for a workshop?